it looks like we're good. So, yeah, Gary, it's great to be speaking with you and to give you a bit of context as to, why I reached out and what I wanted to talk about. Really, I just have a project where I like talking to, interesting, unique people within the Ithaca or Cornell community. And, I've spent a lot of time downtown Ithaca. So, former director of the Downtown Ithaca Alliance makes a lot of sense. And yeah, on that note, I kind of want to start off with what initially got you interested or even started in the space of, business development and community rejuvenation, that type of stuff, because, you served as the director for a long time and now you have your own consulting firm. So I guess, can you give us a bit of a, background as far as your career and how you got started in it?
Sure. I mean, I kind of came into it through the side door, if you will, and stayed. I actually was training and schooling to be, to be in the foreign service to actually do international relations type activity. And at that point in time, the it didn't work out, but for a bunch of different reasons, mainly because at the year I wanted to enter it, the class was cut in half by the president, and so I was on the second half of the of the half, and just didn't do it. And at that point, I said, "All right, the hell with that. I'll do something else." And started looking at doing domestic development instead of international development, doing domestic development, and ended up doing some work on a couple different nonprofits, and eventually got a job up in Maine doing downtown development, downtown revitalization, and I really liked it, and I have been doing that ever since. So it's almost 45 years. So it's been so I've worked with nonprofits my whole life, and which has its pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
But it I guess found it to be a fascinating occupation, in one where one day you're figuring out how to deal with litter and rubbish, the next day you're talking to the senator from your state, or you're or working on big multi-million-dollar projects, or and everything in between, and that was fascinating, and that kind of diversity really kept me going, I think.
Definitely. And that's partly what I'm curious about because, you hear business development, economic development, and I just broadly think, okay, making sure local business does well, making sure, town activities do well. But, you're talking about, you're maybe talking with senators, or you're looking at these multi-million-dollar deals, or you're looking at littering. I guess, can you give us some more insight as to, I guess, what one actually does working in business or economic development?
Sure. Well, yeah. In fact, the project I'm working on right now is for a city up not too far from here, Geneva, New York.
Yeah.
Doing an economic development strategy for them. I mean, you're really trying. I guess you start with the assumption that it's possible to change the course of a community's life. That community is not destined to be a certain way all the time. That you can make a difference. You can change it. And not everybody believes that.
Yeah.
But I think those of us in the industry certainly do, and believe that whether it's a community or whether it's a place like a downtown,
Yeah.
You can affect change. You can make a difference in what happens going forward. Sometimes you have to do it very incrementally. Very seldom do you get the opportunity to do it, in one false swoop. But you can make differences, and you can sort of alter the trajectory of a place or of a community by the way you put together programs and enact policies, tackle different, put together different, I think, packages that would, again, try to make a substantial difference in the life of the place.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of, I mean, in the very broad perspective, that's really what I think people in this industry or this business try to do. Um, and I think my sort of advice for people is you always try to do a little of a lot. It's very rare that you get the opportunity. Like Micron is coming to greater Syracuse area, going to bring 50,000 jobs.
Right.
Going to make a huge difference to the New York economy. It's being touted by the Biden administration and by all sorts of people, as a big home run for the country. Well, that's the first one of those I've seen in my 45-year career. They don't happen very often, and so it's typically you're more in the case of, all right, we do a little bit here, we do a little bit there, we set the stage, we try to make the environment more attractive and interesting place. We get some small hits and some small, some small wins. We parlay those into bigger wins, and begin generating, positive spin and appeal. And you're basically like you would be building a business. You're building an asset. You're building a community, and that's really what you're trying to do. And the hard part is you don't always control everything. Unlike a business where you may be in more control of everything. In a shaping a community or shaping a downtown, you don't control what property owners do.
Right.
You can help shape them. You can help guide them. You can encourage them. There's things you can do, but at the end of the day, if someone decides they want to lease all their empty vacant spaces to, head shops or cannabis shops.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Fine. Now I got to deal with that.
Right. Yeah.
but so it's just one of those things where, that did happen in one case here in Ithaca. There was one year where we had, I think, 8 or 10 of them, and I reacted to that and said, okay, that's enough. We're changing the image of our community, and it's affecting a lot of things. So I actually took some legislation to the city council and said, let's restrict how many we can have. And they basically sent me away.
Really?
There's no way. There's no way we're getting involved with this. That's private enterprise.
Yeah.
Coming from the city council of Ithaca, which is fairly left-leaning, I went, that's really odd for you to say, but go ahead.
Right.
But those are sort of things where sometimes you control a lot, sometimes you control very little. But you try to, so part of the art of what we do is when you taking advantage of what things we can do, and trying to, minimize the things that we can't.
Right. So I'm kind of curious about, what exactly, because we're talking about, changing a community, and there's maybe lots of different projects, like you said, the thing in Syracuse, it's very rare that it's ever this one huge giant thing. It's maybe a lot of little different things. So I guess I'm curious, when we're talking about changing a community, how do we measure that? Or, if you have a project, what's the goal? What's the metric for success? Does it depend on every individual project, or are there sometimes, these goals?
It's a really good question. And I actually wrote an article on metrics of success, something that very title, within I think last year. But it was it's something people struggle with, trying to figure out how do I know if I'm successful?
Right.
And I think part of it is sort of having a game plan and having a strategic plan that you can always go back to and say, all right, what is our goal? If our goal is to create 1,000 units of new housing in our downtown, have we done it? Can we do it? What are the impediments? What's holding us back? How do we get the resources? Where do we find the development talent? All that sort of. So part of it is really have up front trying to come up with some tangible goals you can then work toward and then measure your success. Beyond that, it gets a little trickier. I want to fill all my vacancies. I don't want any street front vacancies, or I don't want any office vacancies in our,
Right.
in our. Oh, well, first of all, that's kind of a pipe dream,
Yeah.
but then secondly, it's like, okay, I can fill them with what,
Right. Yeah.
and there's a qualitative difference between, I can fill it with lots of different things. Some of them might be more interesting and more appealing and more permanent or more sustaining than others. So it's never too easy. In fact, I think one of the piece I wrote basically suggested that particularly downtowns need to have sort of a multifaceted metric. One metric isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, the media in particular, the New York Times is really good at this, coming up and saying, well, this is not successful because they didn't do this.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of 20 metrics that you probably should be looking at. If you look at those 20 metrics, yeah, they didn't do so well on that one, but they did pretty good on those other 16. So, I mean, it's one of those things where, I mean, part of it is knowing and having that up front and then being able to talk to people and communicate it out. So if somebody said, well, yeah, but you haven't created, 50,000 jobs. Well, no, but here's what we did do. Yeah. And so I think part of it is certainly being able to know up front, is to do that kind of strategic thinking. And a lot of communities and cities and downtowns don't do that. They kind of run day by day. I mean, there's this real difference between organizations, and I think you see it in business too, organizations who manage and organizations who try to lead, or do both. And those who manage sometimes don't have long-term goals.
Right.
And so it's pretty, so how am I doing? Yesterday was pretty good.
Right.
But okay, well, what does that mean about, about next year or 5 years from now? Right.
So on that topic of, some communities kind of managing, maybe phoning it in or not really trying to, change things up or bring new, I guess development is the word, and other communities that do, I think I saw during your time working, for Ithaca, I think it's over $500 million in new investments, something like that.
1 million square feet and well over $500 million.
Yeah. So can you just speak to, that some of the things that you were able to do and maybe some of the biggest successes, some of the things that you can actually change, when a community decides that they want to, put the effort in, revitalizing their community?
Yeah, well, I think part of it was sort of setting the stage for it. The context was that there really was, there had been about a generation of no growth in the downtown area. And it had been pretty slow before that. So there really hadn't been it hadn't really been sort of a culture of growth in the center city. I know all the growth that was happening, and there was growth happening in this community, was on the edges of town, where it's cheap to buy land. It was basically your basic suburban sprawl type growth.
Right.
And I think one of the things that we sort of early on said was, all right, we got to make sure we have as level a playing field as possible. And there's some things we need to do to set the stage for development to happen in the center city. So we had to change the zoning. We had to make sure there was sufficient parking. Because actually we had zoning that didn't require parking, which is wonderful, but that didn't matter. If you're building buildings, your financier, your banker, your investors will require you to have some element of demonstrate that you have parking,
right? Whether
the city requires it or not. And if you can't do that, you're not going to get money. So you had to do something like that. There had to be some incentives as well. I mean, the cost of developing in the center city was far more expensive than developing out in a cornfield. And so you had to find some way to provide enough incentive that a developer would take a look at it and go, it's worth the risk. So those are things we up front we did. So we created a tax abatement program for downtown. We created a new density platform that allowed for more density and more height, um, um, which is interesting because a lot of small cities around our region would never do that. Never do that. Oh my God, you're building a big city in a little town. And we heard a lot of that over the first probably 10 years of my existence. That was a major battle. That was a major discussion in the community. It was, what do this is not the community I moved to. I didn't come here to be part of a big city. Well, so I think but anyway, but we had to work through those sort of things.
Yeah.
No, so it did take a lot of prep. I mean, so I think a lot of the success was predicated on having a certain number of steps that were done ahead of time that sort of helped set the stage. One of the things we also did was our organization hired a consultant to work on to do a housing study for us. The city had never done a housing study, and everybody assumed that the only kind of housing that made sense to do in Ithaca was student housing, and that you could do that primarily in College Town only, and you probably wanted to do that. You wanted to convert, buildings into housing, and I think we quickly dispelled that by bringing in the consultant. They quickly demonstrated that no, there's a massive market that's not being touched. That given the opportunity, people would glom onto. And sure enough, I mean, I think we ended up building during my time there well over 1,000 housing units. I think it's closer to like 1,200. But but it was at the time nobody thought you could build any, and so part of it was sort of, again, setting the stage and helping developers and people in the investment process, like bankers, financiers, understand, appraisers, understand that, there is an opportunity that nobody has just paid attention to.
Right. So on that specific note, I'm kind of curious, we're talking about maybe developers, investors, bankers. I mean, at the end of the day, someone has to fund all of this. When you're, looking at all these projects, trying to get them done, how much of it is kind of maybe like a bit of a sales job, or pitching them like, hey, here's what we can do. We know we can make it happen. We just need someone to, help us do that. Is that a big part of it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, oftentimes the first, certainly from my standpoint, the first level of pitching, if you will, were to developers.
Yeah.
Were to find people who would be willing to make that investment, or at least lead that investment effort, and put some of their own money on the table. Because remember, I mean, any investments like this are not 100%. I mean,
right.
aren't 100% leveraged. There's equity involved somewhere along the line. And the newer the rawer and the newer the projects, the more equity you're most likely to have to put on the table. So part of it was convincing folks that it was a worthy endeavor to try to do this. And so, I mean, rather than start with national or out of town developers, I started talking to local developers first. And again, these were people who had traditionally not thought about anything but student housing. Yeah. So the idea of doing something for people who were not students was a real foreign idea to them. But we got one or two. They worked, and people were excited by it. And I think one of the things then we were able to do is, I think, leverage and market ourselves, not just, a little more broadly, so that folks understood that there was a real opportunity here that people could get in on and might miss if you didn't take a leap at it.
Right.
And so I think that's, one begat another. And once we had a couple, it got a little bit easier. We started getting interest from regional and national developers. And that brought its own series of issues to the table. Once you have national developers, your community acts a little bit differently. Our incentive program changed dramatically at that point, simply because people were afraid of national developers, and I think wanted to make sure that they could control the process and got as much community benefit out of it as possible. But through it all, I think we were still able to maintain all these building blocks that we had and continued to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah. I mean, given that there are so many, as we said earlier, given that there are so many types of projects that go into, let's say, helping or developing a community, and we see here maybe there's some bit of pitching a little bit. You have to be in regulation. Maybe you're thinking about housing. Maybe there's some marketing. There's all these different things that go into really developing a community. What would you say is the most important thing in order to, I guess, be a successful community developer? Is it really just about being able to think critically and solve problems, or is there more to it that you could pinpoint down? Because it seems like you need everything.
I think it's making sure there's a team of community leaders
Got it.
who are aligned, because I worked in a city in Massachusetts, actually, where that was not the case. They brought me in to do some, to lead a sort of a downtown development effort, and to run their economic development sort of private sector efforts. And the private sector didn't talk to the city. The city, the Chamber of Commerce was on its own little planet, wasn't talking to anybody. It was like, wait a minute, this is crazy land. Nobody's singing, nobody's playing from the same, songbook here, and everybody had a different idea of success. And a lot of times it was personal. And it went, okay, this is not that was not a recipe for success. I got little things done. I never got big things done.
Yeah.
Could not. And it was interesting because I actually had access in that job to more private capital, perhaps, than any place I've been. But the city, private sector could not agree with each other. It was quite a mess. And that was a lesson to me, that, okay, before you sort of step into a situation, make sure you understand, the alignment of players. Are people likely to be, supportive or not?
Right.
And what are their interests and their aims, and do they align? And if they don't, you can do a whole lot, but you're not going to get over the hump. You're not going to get over the hump.
Right.
You're not going to be able to be as successful as you would otherwise. And I think, I was very careful thereafter taking a look at that. But that was a hard lesson. I think that certainly I had in my career. So I think I was in that city for about 3 years and said, all right, that's enough. I got to move on. This is just not worth it. Which was a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm from Massachusetts, so are you able to say the city or maybe
Sure.
not?
It was Haverhill, Massachusetts.
Haverhill, okay. I think, how far is that from Boston?
Oh, it's North Shore.
North
So
Shore.
there's 3 cities that kind of make up that northern tier there: Lowell, Lawrence, and Haverhill. And Haverhill was the one furthest and probably closest to the New Hampshire border. It actually bordered New Hampshire. It was pretty good size city, but boy, at that time it did not have its act together.
Yeah. I'm from Amherst, which is, I don't know if you know, but it's Western Mass, so it's maybe like probably an hour and a half from there.
No, I know it well.
Yeah. Have you been?
Yep. I've been there. We've studied Northampton very closely. Studied Amherst a little bit, but mainly Northampton because it's more appropriate, I think, to Ithaca.
What are some of the parallels between Northampton and Ithaca? Like, what is it that you're looking at?
Well, they're both university schools, so they
Right.
both have the influence of higher education.
Right.
Figures prominently in the economy. Northampton had similar size, I think, downtown, Although again, that's an example of a city that decided we don't want tall buildings.
Yeah.
Our tallest building is 3 stories. We don't want anything bigger than that.
Yeah.
And I think my argument here to this community was we were losing the before. I mean, when I came here, it was pretty safe to say the city was losing the battle of growth. 99% of all the growth was going in the suburbs. If you wanted to win that battle and you have some growth in the city, it's going to be primarily in the center city. You're not going to put in your neighborhoods.
Right.
And you had to have some density. 2-story buildings in downtown doesn't make sense. Particularly if if I think one of my sort of guiding, so back to sort of the sort of goals and objectives
Yeah.
for, I think, thinking about downtown Ithaca, really wanted to have, in order to, in good, Ithaca has a tourist trade, and that's been great. And having the pedestrian mall has certainly been a draw, as tourist draw all by itself. But if you want to maintain commerce on a regular basis and kind of have that kind of sustainability that everybody looks for in a community, you want to have a good, I think you want to have a lot of workers who work in and around the downtown area, and you want to have a lot of people who live there. And you have to build that up. And if you have that, you have a built-in audience, so that no matter what happens, even in you're going to have, you can fall back on that population base to help support you. So that was part of one of my guiding principles, was that, yeah, we wanted to build that base up. Because businesses can come and go.
Yeah.
And certainly saw that with the pandemic. Yeah, and so the more diversified, the more different aspects you had built into your economy, the more likely you are to thrive or survive. And so I think that was sort of the goal we had in mind, and hence the idea of building up the base of people who live downtown.
Right.
And if you want to do that, you're not going to build 1-story, 2-story houses.
Yeah.
You're going to build higher building. You don't have, you only have a limited amount of space. You got to go up.
Right.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If in the meantime you try to keep the ground level, the ground floor, the ground spaces in your downtown, in your key area, vibrant, exciting places that people want to go to. Where a lot of cities have made the mistake. Syracuse was a great example of that. For example, I mean, Rochester is probably the best example around here. I mean, they built tall buildings, but then they ignored the street level, and there was nothing. There was nothing on the street level.
Right.
These buildings, at one point, these buildings could have been full, but the first floor looked like, I mean, there was no life there was no life on the street level, and no reason for anybody to go there.
Yeah.
And so you wanted to avoid that at all costs, and you wanted to find different ways of doing that. And that's one of the things that we tried to do, I think, with our program as well.
Right. What's interesting is because Amherst, kind of is going through, I mean, they're maybe over it now, but they recently, maybe a few years ago, they built, I think, the first maybe 4 or 5-story building in downtown. And it's housing, it's apartments. And there hasn't been any like that before. Like I'm sure you've been. It's all maybe 1-story, 2-story, maybe town hall is like 3-story buildings, but it was all a relatively small town. And a few years ago, they built this huge brick thing I forget the street, but on the corner downtown. And there was some pushback from people in the area saying kind of what you were saying earlier, like, hey, this isn't Amherst. I didn't move here for this. I've been here for a while. This is, not the look of the town. It's, disrupting the environment, etc.
Right.
So I guess my question to you is, how do you balance when you're looking at a project, the, growth, the economic side, bring new things, that aspect of it, as opposed to preserving the culture, community, and history of a town?
Well, you want to do both. Yeah.
Right.
And so one of the things, for example, we did in Ithaca was when we redid the zoning that made for tall buildings, we specifically made sure the existing historic buildings on the commons, for example, in the area around there, the zoning was kept at, I believe it was 70 feet, which was the height of these buildings. These were 3 or 4 story buildings in downtown historically, and we made sure that was the case. Now, you went back 70, 100 feet, you could go up 14 stories. So I think part of it was being very thoughtful about how you did things, and so recognizing that, yeah, if you went to downtown Amherst and said, we're going to change the zoning to make it better, so we can have 15-story buildings all over downtown Amherst. Well, people will buy up 1 and 2 story buildings and rip them down.
Yeah.
So they could build a 15-story building.
Right.
And get a lot more value. Well, you don't want that to happen.
Right.
Unless they're bad buildings.
Yeah.
And, unless they're something, so you want to carefully think about how you keep that from happening. And when we were able to, and we did that. We haven't had massive, demolitions. Unfortunately, in the 1960s, that did happen here in Ithaca as part of urban renewal here in the United States. Ithaca drank the Kool-Aid, and I think between a third and a half of their downtown was just demolished totally.
Right.
It was just razed with money paid for it by the federal government, so that they could rebuild. And they rebuilt nothing, very little. The library building, which was a former Woolworth store, that got rebuilt. 1-story building. I mean, the theory at that time was I wanted to, if I could build buildings that look like the suburbs are successful. If I can build like that, downtown will be successful. And that was that was about as wrong as you could possibly be.
Right.
Nobody wants to have a suburban experience in a downtown. It's just, or in a center city, in an urban environment. You want an urban experience. And people didn't get that. It took a while for people to come to that understanding. But in the meantime, what you didn't want to do is create an aesthetic, an aesthetic that it was so devoid of life and activity.
Right.
Like a lot of middle-sized downtowns around cities around the United States did that, and they lost all their people. Nobody wanted to live there. Nobody wanted to go there to play or entertain. Nobody wanted to go there to shop. It all disappeared. So part of it is, you need to maintain an environment that is attractive and interesting, and is a magnet to pull people in, whether they're living there or whether they're visiting there or whether they're, working there.
Right. Now, I think that's a very good point, because really what we're talking about, we talk about projects, investments, business, housing, etc. At the end of the day, we're talking about people and whether or not they want to, not only be in the city, but really live there. So I guess I have a bit of a question from a different angle. You've clearly seen and worked intimately with lots of different communities, cities all over the country. So let's say someone is maybe looking for a place to live. They're maybe going to a totally new area. They're not really familiar. If they're evaluating, you can say cities, communities, towns, whatever, are there certain things that you look at to see if this is really just a good place to live that people might not be aware of?
Well, I do. The question is, do other people?
Right.
Yeah, I think there is. And a lot of that speaks well to small cities, and some of it does not.
Yeah.
So an example of what does not would be, all right, people, the helm of the Downtown Ithaca Alliance. If that job had stopped, I would have left.
Yeah.
Because that was the only such job in this area. It's not like I could, stop this job and go across the street and pick up another one.
Right.
So, people in tech, for example, there are tech jobs in Ithaca, and there are people doing great tech things here. The challenge is we don't. It's not like the West. It's not like Silicon Valley. It's not like suburban Boston. It's not like Raleigh, Durham,
Right.
where or Austin, where I can just go across the street and pick another tech job.
Yeah. Right.
And there are hundreds of them. There are opportunities for me so that I'm not felt like I'm trapped or I think for a lot of people, that's a question mark. And so for people like me, you kind of, in my occupation, you kind of got used to the idea of you're going to move around a little bit.
Right.
And it's a great luxury. For example, when I was able to stay here for 25 years, that's, I had 5 or 6 other stops on my career before that.
Yeah.
And that was more normal than not. And part of that is just the changing. You get to a point where you go, I can't do any more here, or this is not a good situation, or like I said, the one in Haverhill, parties weren't aligning the way I wanted. You really wanted them to. You could hang in there and just kind of milk the job, but the question is, to what end? That's not. I got no interest in that.
Right.
But you kind of got used to the idea that, all right, these are going to be one-off opportunities. Whereas, a lot of my friends and a lot of family members and things that are in tech, they gravitate to these places where there's a lot of opportunity.
Right.
Where if something goes wrong, they can get, one of my brother-in-laws, great tech guy, he's in Denver, but that's a big enough market that he's changed jobs probably 4 times.
Yeah.
Stayed in his house, stayed right there. If you were in Ithaca in tech doing that, you probably couldn't do that as easily.
Yeah. Right.
So that's a challenge.
Yeah.
For a small city. On the other hand, boy, the market for small city markets like this, downtown Ithaca has a walkability score of 97 out of 100.
Yeah.
It's similar to Greenwich Village. It's really good. 50% of the people who live in downtown Ithaca don't have cars.
Really?
They don't need them.
Well, yeah.
Now,
yes. Yeah.
That's really, for a small city, that's really quite good.
Yeah.
So there's some real positives and things that go along with that. And even in places, I'm like I say, I'm working up in Geneva, a city just north of here, on an economic development plan. And one of the things we learned was that in their city, their travel to work time is one of the lowest in that part of the state, by almost 50%. A lot of people walk to work, or they take transit to work, and that's a huge savings in people's pocketbook. That's something you can sort of market around and go, you don't need that. You might want to still have a car, but that's your choice. But again, I think the bottom line is there are some environments in smaller cities and smaller communities where you can get, in a place like Ithaca, it's the number of blocks you have to transform is small relative to if you're in a big city. Getting, I don't know, if I want to get downtown Youngstown, Ohio, right, it's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a much bigger city.
Right.
Ithaca was not that big, and I think that that really helped us, I think, achieve a lot of the results we want. Now, even with that, as I mentioned, the pandemic, hurt business. A lot of small businesses went out, changed the office environment. So a lot of things happen, and not just in Ithaca, but all over the country, that have changed the dynamics, and people, in this industry now have to work through that.
Right. So I know it's a bit of a tough question, but if you had to sum it up, someone's looking for a community to live in, they're trying to evaluate if it's a good spot to be in. What advice would you give to them in maybe a couple sentences?
Um, I probably lived in perhaps 10 different places in my life. Um, I mean, each time I looked for something that aligned with either my or our family's sort of um, um, the things that we valued. Um, so, for example, in coming to Ithaca, we were we really wanted to be in a place that valued learning and higher education. So the idea of being in a college community was kind of exciting.
Right.
Now you could do that in a big city. You didn't have to come to a small city to do that. But I think I also wanted to be in a place where I could make a difference. Now, I was fortunate enough that I had a position and a job here that I really could make a big difference. But even if you're coming here to work, do whatever, I think this sort of being a big fish in a small pool sometimes has a lot of appeal to it. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
Somebody who likes to blend in, doesn't like this. I mean, doesn't like to put themselves on the line. Might not like a smaller city. I didn't mind that. I liked that. I was willing to, do that and do that regularly. But so I think you have to sort of make sure you go someplace that aligns with your values and what you hold dear.
Right.
And for some people, I mean, I've got a couple, I have two daughters. I have three daughters, but two of them, said pretty clearly, no, we want to live in a bigger city.
Yeah.
We want to live in a bigger, we want a bigger environment. We want more nightlife. We want more, we want what a big city has to offer. And I've got a third, kind of likes this environment, and kind of likes this. Now, would she live in a smaller city, a smaller, a rural town or something? Probably not. But I think part of working in a place like Ithaca is trying to help build up the assets and the amenities that help, I think, set it up so that people will want to work and live and stay here.
Right.
And that's part of I think our thought process was, what else do we need here that's going to be important to people?
Yeah.
Do we have, then all of a sudden it's not just big things. Do we have a sports stadium? Well, we do on campus, but do we have? But we do have coffee shops. We have, how many? Do we have enough coffee shops? Do we have enough place? Do we have enough outdoor seating? Do we have, outdoor cafes? Do we have, do we have those types of things that on a micro level that begin to shape a community and make people feel warm and cozy about? I like that.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah.
Do we have enough variety in our restaurants so that someone would go, yeah, I like that too.
Yeah.
And even more difficult, and I know one we've spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to work on with some success, not a lot, but some. For example, when we try to work with the Black population coming to live in Ithaca.
Yeah.
Well, do we have the assets and amenities that they're looking for?
Right.
Have to drive to New York City or drive to Rochester to get their haircut.
Right.
To buy products that they want or need.
Right.
So part of it is, making sure we try to think about those things. Because otherwise, if you don't, people make decisions get made, without, they get made regardless.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is to help shape those and help make the outcome a little bit better.
Right. I want to ask about the, business side a little bit. You've obviously worked with, I don't know how many, probably hundreds of different small businesses in your career. So let's say I wanted to start a business downtown. Let's say I want to open up maybe I don't know, a bagel shop. What is the process for, having an idea, then actually opening the doors in Ithaca or even just in general,
Yeah.
opening up a small business?
Well, it varies from state to state. In some places, there's more regulation, there's more licenses you have to get depending on the business. In New York State, you don't have to get very much,
Hmm.
unless you're getting, unless you're doing alcoholic beverages where you're obviously going to need a permit,
Right.
or you're doing cosmetology where you need a license to cut hair, that sort of thing. I think what we tried to do was to help people make sure there were resources in the community, and sometimes we acted as one of those resources to help talk to people and review their plans, to help them formulate plans. So many people came to us, want to start a business, and they didn't have a written plan.
Right.
They had a general notion about what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that's usually not a good sign. Usually you need to have something, it's the more thoughtful and refined this is, the more likelihood you're going to get it off the ground and have it succeed. So part of it was kind of getting people to think seriously about what they want to do and not just sort of leap at it. The smaller the business, the more likely they would be leaping and not actually planning. And even small businesses, you need to plan just as much as you do for a big one. So that was part of it, is to sort of giving people some guidance. It's okay to tell people, boy, you're not ready.
Yeah.
or go back and do some more work.
Yeah.
I mean, I seldom, I have said no to people, and most of the time I basically say, boy, you need to do some more work.
Right.
And it's okay to do that.
Yeah.
I'd much rather, I've seen people invest their life savings in business.
Yeah, it's better for them. You don't want to
see it disappear in 6
not
months.
going to, right.
Oh yeah. See it disappear.
Exactly.
It's terrible, and you can't stop someone from doing that if they want to do that. But on the other hand, I think you can try to give them. My thought would be, how do we help somebody? How do we help improve someone's chances of success? And the more we can do that, the better. Now, obviously, some places have incentive grants, and we've never had a lot of incentive grants. But we tried to help people with marketing plans. We tried to help people with finding space. We didn't negotiate for them, but I always gave people advice about, if you wanted to, here's how you should approach this and think about this. There's some basic rules of the road about if you're going to be in a front-facing business, a consumer-facing business, a retail service type business, what percent of your volume should comprise rent and occupancy costs. So there are things that guidelines we can provide to people to help them think about it.
Right.
And if you're pushing, if your occupancy costs are 50%, you're going to be gone in 6 months.
Yeah.
You're not going to make enough money to be successful. So part of it is just helping people understand that
Right.
That's not how it works.
Yeah.
And maybe if you're independently wealthy and you just want to play. Yeah. You don't need me. But if you want to try to make it work, then I think our goal was to try to just help people get to the next level. And again, in this city, we didn't have a whole lot of, I think, resources to do that. Over time, during the pandemic, for example, we were able to come up with a bunch of different, loan programs and grant programs to help people. But ongoing, those were somewhat limited. And so we were able to help development sometimes, developers, as part of that leveling the playing field type thing. We certainly had some ways to do that. But for businesses in particular, a lot of it was just making sure we got them off on the right foot.
Right.
And you know, I mean, on many occasions here in Ithaca, I remember talking to people, you know, talking them out of doing one type of business and doing another,
Yeah.
which is, I think, a good thing.
Right. Yeah.
Now, you know, but I know some of my counterparts around the country would listen to that statement and go, "Oh my God, I would never do that. I would never do that. What if it went wrong?" I said, well, first of all, if you didn't do that, it's probably going to go wrong.
Yeah.
For starters, but no, I think it's important to. That's why I say it's important to be able to offer people as much help as possible, recognizing at the end of the day, it's on them. They
Right.
get to make the decisions. It's not my money, not my decision. You know, if I'm an investor, different story. I
Yeah.
get to tell you a little bit about what I think you should do or not do,
Yeah.
depending on the arrangement. But um, so.
So let's say someone, they have a good idea. It's not something that, should be done by someone else or isn't a good concept. Let's say they have a good idea. They've got the business started. They have the plan. They're in their first few months. And I guess especially now, I mean, e-commerce, online shopping, things like that are on the rise. So my question was going to be, how do you, like, generally, what are strategies to get people in the door at a physical location? And I guess the second part to that would be, I mean, has that changed recently given, everything going online?
Well, remember, I retired a little over a year ago. So
Okay.
so I'm not, so I'm doing sort of a different thing now. But I think that's what the question you're sort of asking is a major question that communities all around the United States and really worldwide are kind of wrestling with is what's the future of bricks and mortar
Right.
relative to the internet, relative to online. And depending on who you talk to, you get very different answers. I think there are some industries that have been dramatically, or some occupations and some segments that have been dramatically impacted by that. But even then, there's been sort of let's take even then it's sort of variable. Take bookstores, for example. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Prior to the rise of Amazon, pre-Amazon, bookstores, bookstores didn't have online competition. The biggest competitors to bookstores were themselves. There were independent bookstores and there were nationals. And the nationals were beating the hell out of the locals, out of the independents. And a handful of independents were able to, hang on by being specialized and by being community oriented and things like that. But it was really hard. Amazon came along and started out as a bookseller, and obviously became now it sells anything and everything. But it started out as a bookseller, and it dramatically changed that marketplace. Beat the crap out of everybody, but particularly the big box stores.
Yeah.
Borders books disappeared. Borders was one of the big box giants, disappeared. And there are a bunch of others as well. But interestingly, the mom and pop, independent bookstores have been making a comeback, even with such a high percent of books being sold now online, or people not even buying books.
Yeah.
Because it's been sort of niched, and I think these folks have figured out there's been a backlash against, Amazon, and some of the sellers online are not mom and pop stores by any great stretch of the imagination. A lot of people now get that. So, while it doesn't mean that they certainly have a market share and a pretty good one, but it's interesting that independent bookstores have actually have come back on an upward trajectory now, in part because it's an experience type of thing. I know I went on vacation. I was on a vacation a couple of weeks ago, up in Maine. And, we've been looking around a lot of these nice seacoast villages, and inevitably we're in a bookstore. Why? It's an experiential thing.
Right.
And
Yeah, it
um,
can't be replicated.
yeah, well, yeah. And so I can buy a book online easy, but can I peruse and browse and read through and look at the covers and see what it looks like? I mean, no, I can't do that. Not very easily at all. If I know what I want, I can go and get it. But that experience, has been, and so bookstores are a good example of something that's had a rebound. And partly is that it's an experience. Experiential retail is still, is gaining ground and is doing well. And it's a reason why I think a lot of like even during the pandemic, restaurants seem to fare fairly well. These days, restaurants have a different problem. They have the problem of labor and help. Um, they can't get it, and that's been a problem for, that's been part of the curse of a lot of food and beverage places. Um, but it's interesting. I think bricks and mortar has a place in our society, and we're still sorting that out. We're trying to figure out, all right, what's the Mets Main Street going to look like 10 or 20 years from today?
Yeah.
Think it will still be there
Yeah.
because people want something at the street level that that engages them. They don't want to. I mean, they don't want their people don't want Main Street anywhere to be 50 insurance companies.
Yeah. Right.
That has absolutely no appeal to anybody in any way, shape, or form. So it's what I think we're sorting that out, and communities are still working really hard on that now. You're seeing a return to a lot of food and beverage at the expense of sort of, I think, traditional retail. But I think there are some traditional retail that will survive and it will continue to grow because not everybody, but enough people will kind of like it to be able to allow that to happen.
Right.
So part of it is sort of, I think there's this process that people are kind of going through right now. I think each of us do it and communities are doing it, trying to figure out, well, what are they? And what is it?
Right.
And it might be different in each community, depending on what the population is, what they like. Do they have tourists? Do they have visitors? Do they have students? What is it? We know that students, for example, buy heavily online.
Yeah.
Heavily online. So what do they want? What do they like to buy in person?
Right.
The answer is not nothing.
Yeah.
You do like to buy some things in person. The question is what? And and so part of it is that process is happening now. And it's interesting because it's sort of reshaping the retail marketplace. And obviously, places like some of the malls and things really are having, some of those are really suffering because they haven't been able to do that very well.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you're retired from your position working specifically with Ithaca, but to me, it seems like you have your own consulting firm, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's similar type of work. I mean, can you explain what it is that you're doing there and why you wanted to make the transition?
Sure. Well, I mean, I want to take advantage of some of the experience that I've had, and in economic development and downtown revitalization, and work with communities and businesses, to again do a lot of this to help strengthen places. So I'm looking for those opportunities and working with communities that have that kind of interest and that kind of aptitude. Again, not everybody does. A lot of times people are willing to go with the flow. I can't change history. The market's the market.
Right.
Well, that's not my approach.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that, you can affect the marketplace. You have to be willing to do some things differently. And if you're not, well, then you're not going to change the marketplace. But if you're willing to, then I think there's opportunities out there for places and for communities, and so part of me, yes, says, yeah, I think I'd love to be able to help more people do that.
Right. Can you give me an idea of maybe some example projects you've been working on? Is it very similar to what you're doing in the past, or is it maybe a bit of a different angle now?
Well, they're all a little bit different. Like this one, I mean, literally, I'm right in the midst of doing this one up in Geneva, New York, which is it's a city about half the size of Ithaca. But probably has a downtown twice the size of Ithaca.
Really?
So interest. So yeah, right there's an interesting dynamic. A population half the size, but a downtown twice the size.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that tells you right now that, okay, that's an interesting problem right in itself. But it's trying to figure out how to grow. It's shrinking in population. It's lost population the last 30 years. What should they be doing? So they want an economic development strategy to help them figure out what should they be doing. How can they change? They want to be able to change the landscape. And so that's what we're working on, or what are in the next 5 years, what are the things that they should be focusing on that can make a difference? And how should they go ahead doing that? Right. So, good case and example. So in that case, we're working on things like, well, first of all, do you have a lot of the infrastructure, the processes in place? If somebody comes to your community and wants to start a business, who do they talk to?
Yeah.
You have the resources available to help them. What kind of help do they get? Are they going to end up going somewhere else? If a developer, they want to build housing. All right, well, what kind of support and help do you have? Have you set it up so developers can succeed? If not, what do you got to do to change that? Right. So a lot of it is sort of, doing that sort of front end looking and figuring out, okay, how do you help somebody set up themselves for trying to succeed down the road?
Right.
So that's just an example. But it includes not only downtown, but includes, citywide economic development as well. But it's a good case in point. And there's a community that basically said, we're shrinking in population. We can't keep shrinking. The more we shrink, the less resources we have. We have less. All of a sudden, our elementary, our K-12 schools are struggling because they have less resources. You get paid by how many students you have.
Right.
As you shrink, things get worse. They don't get better.
Right.
And so, I think they pretty much know what they'd like to do. Part of it now is trying to figure out the best way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a tough question, obviously shrinking population has a lot of negative implications for many different reasons. But so the core question of getting more people into the city is, it's a clear goal. But, obviously you're not going to be directly reaching out to people saying, hey, come move here. It's, through improving the community, the schools, et cetera, that people who were considering it are maybe more likely to go there. So, I mean, I guess you just said that you're still trying to figure it out, but my question was going to be, what is the biggest factor, the biggest thing that, people, kind of like what I said earlier when they're evaluating a community, but I guess in this specific case, like,
I'll tell you in
schools, I mean,
yeah, I'll tell you in 30 days, so yeah, we're a lot closer to having an answer to that. But although it's interesting, even they did not realize, I just looked at some data that that we had gotten. They are I think they were 8 times more compared to the statewide average in New York, they were attracting new residents 8 times faster than any other place, than really? the average in the state of New York. They didn't even know that.
Yeah.
So it's actually a place that you ask, would people want to live in a place like that? Yeah. Yeah, I think people would, especially if they knew a little bit more about it. And especially if you set it up and sort of promoted it more.
Right.
I know people in Geneva, for example, sometimes are hard on themselves. Well, we're too small a city. We're losing population. Oh my God! The sky is falling. I don't know what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's change the narrative a little bit here. Um, um, you you're a city on a lake, extremely beautiful, gorgeous architecture, um, a downtown, environment, building environment to die for, buildings that are available to developers at a fraction of the cost of Ithaca. Um, like, let's change the environment. Let's change the narrative a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, um, but it's so anyway, but those are some of the opportunities that are out there, is to try to help folks like that. And each community has comes from a slightly different place.
Right.
So
I'm curious, kind of as like a side note. I mean, have you done any work involving, events, community events, that type of stuff?
Well, sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, when I was at the Downtown Alliance, we were the event planner for the community. In fact, we ran a county program for event planning to help people countywide do events.
Yeah.
We ran the largest events, and we had a lending library of not just materials, but of props and everything from sound systems to tables and chairs to stanchions, you name it. We had it available that people could borrow to help make their events more cost effective and work better.
Yeah.
But we yeah, we did an awful lot with that. And again, I think one of the thoughts, certainly my goals and thoughts in doing events, because they were not always. I remember having board members who said we shouldn't be doing them. Why are you involved in that? Spend
Yeah.
all your time working in development. Why are you doing that? Well, for some people in the community, that was their experience in downtown. That
Yeah.
was their experience getting to downtown, was
Yeah,
going
of
to an
course.
event.
Yeah.
I think we were drawing, 150,000 people a year downtown, but with our own events. And some events are, I mean, and there it gets growing. I mean, the Apple Harvest Festival, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, at its peak, when I think the last year I was there, we had 100,000 people just at that event alone.
Wow.
So but it's an opportunity for people to experience an urban environment, a downtown environment, and go, I'm having fun.
Yeah.
It's not so bad.
Right.
I heard this was a pretty rough place. It doesn't look so rough to me.
Yeah.
It looks pretty nice, actually. I like that coffee shop. I like it's a great way for people to experience their community, to get a little bit more community themselves. So I think there are a lot of dividend to having events, and I think they're usually one of the ways that cities and communities sort of start the regeneration process. They help get people excited about an area, and get them to come to some place where they might not otherwise come. Many students in Cornell never venture off campus.
I know. Yeah. I've
How do you
been
get them
downtown a decent amount, but you talk to a lot of people. They haven't been there in like a year or two, or maybe they've been
Oh, no, there's some people who graduate and never come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, how do you change that? Because, the more you can change that, the more you affect the economy, the more people might go, this might be a nice place to hang around afterwards.
Yeah.
Or maybe I should live here. So there's a lot of dividend to be had in trying to do events. So, yeah.
I mean, part of the reason I ask, and I guess also partly why I've been downtown a decent amount, is I'm sure the activity center, GIAC, and they have the boxing program there, which is, I didn't know when I first came there. A ton of history, been there for a long time, and I think in December they're going to be doing an event, and I wasn't able to be on the last one, but I think I might be, I guess fighting in this December event. So, me personally, like I'll talk to Cornell students, try and get them to come, and if it's usually there's a couple Cornell kids, so you get a lot of people from there. But I'm curious. I mean, have you done anything like that type of thing? Because it's different than say the Harvest Festival.
Well, we've done stuff with GIAC over the years for
Yeah.
sure. Um, in fact, I'm thinking about boxing. One year, I mean, probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little bit more. I arranged to bring in some sports celebrities, some old sports celebrities. So Buster Douglas, the
Yeah.
world heavyweight
Cool.
champ, was one of them. He
Yeah.
came into town and met with students, and we had him meet with some Cornell people as well. And we did an event around those guys. That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
But no, I think I know I haven't done any boxing related things, but I know that program, and I know it's doing pretty well. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's one of the things that the more people can sort of get something like that out there. I mean, GIAC's done a good job, for example, with basketball. They now do the Gus Smacker 3-on-3, and so that attracts a lot of people. So I think, sport related events are really important as well. And it's just part of the package. You want something, a little bit of something for everybody. Now, obviously, there's some people who would have nothing to do with that.
Right.
But there's some people who go, "Oh my God, this is great."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want to, keep you too long, but I do want to.
Yeah, I do have to move on here. Yeah.
I do want to ask, I know you've worked with a lot of different cities, and you're currently working with Geneva, and maybe not directly with Ithaca, but you obviously have a lot of experience. So
Oh, sure. I still work. I do still do some work in Ithaca.
okay, yeah. So I'm curious, what you, I guess really broadly, what you think of Ithaca currently, and then maybe it's, future prospects, like where, we should focus development, where it's currently at, and just kind of the general state of the city.
Yeah, well, I think in cities like Ithaca, sometimes development is tainted as a sort of a negative thing. Oh, well, development's done by rich people,
Yeah.
and it affects poor people, and it's not a good thing. It changes our life, and probably not for the better, and so probably not a good thing. And so part of it, I think, part of what needs to happen over and over and over is this sort of re-education, communication with the community about, let's talk about development and economic development. What are here are our goals. What are we trying to do as a community? Are we still on the same goals we were when I was, doing our thing, or are we have different goals? As councils and legislatures change, so do sort of aspirations. So I think part of what needs to happen now is sort of people need to get reacquainted to sort of what economic development and development's all about here in Ithaca. When are we successful? What do we want? What are we aiming to do? To back to your question, how do we know when we succeed? What are our metrics for success?
Right.
And the answer is, they change over time, and you have to kind of reevaluate, and you come up with new ones. And I think, it's important that happen and continue to happen. And I think that's sort of one thing that's sort of, as players change and the landscape changes a little bit, and as coming out of the pandemic with all the changes that have happened, changes in office, changes in retail, just changing the way people do things. You got to reevaluate. You got to think about, all right, what are the new metrics? What do we want? What are our goals? 20 years from now, what do we want? At the end of the day, how will we know we've done that?
Yeah.
So that's probably, to me, that's probably the one thing that I would like to see the community do a little bit more of. I mean, it has all the tools and recipes and great people in great, doing good things. But given the changes that have happened and the changing and, personalities and the changing elected leadership, it's important, I think, for folks to, have that discussion. And I don't think we've had it for a while. And I think that, causes, when that doesn't happen, it, people kind of revert to whatever they want to do. So,
But I guess last thing, quick fun question. I mean, do you have maybe a favorite store or restaurant in Ithaca?
it's changed over time. Oh gosh. I think a store that's really done really well and I really admire and like what they do is there's a downtown common store named Home Green Home, which does a really good job being a sort of a store, not just a home goods store, but they do a lot of different things. And it's allowed them to kind of, I think, in this marketplace, do as well as they can. I think it's been good for them. So I like them in particular. It's one that comes to mind. Food. Oh gosh. uh, oh, I've always been a fan of Simeon's on the corner
Yeah.
there. It's a business that's been here for a long time. It was actually started by a former mayor, and who sold it off to someone who actually had it for about 10 years, and then he got sick with cancer and died. Just before he died, he sold it to the people who have it now. So it's gone through like 3 different iterations, certainly in my time here, and it continues to do well, and the guys have been really good at what they do, and it's a kind of a fun place to go to, and I think they know how to do a good job.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Gary, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I think it was a very productive, interesting conversation. I certainly learned a lot. And
yeah, good.
Thanks for taking the time.
One quick question for you.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Quant Fund.
The Quant Fund. The Quant Fund is Cornell's premier quantitative finance organization. Essentially, everyone there is maybe a math major, CS major, statistics. It's fun, maybe some physics or something related, basically just quantitative. And the idea is that you are applying those skills to, finance, investing, the stock market, trading. And there's 2 main things. One of the big things we're doing is actually the Cornell trading competition, which we host every year in New York City at Cornell Tech. And this year it's going to be October 19th. And, we have schools from all over the country come and participate. And they have their own teams, and we have different firms, trading firms that come, and they have booths and they give out merch so you can talk to recruiters. And it's a really cool event. It's in I think the Verizon Center. I don't know, but it's a nice building on the Cornell Tech campus. And yeah, I'm the head of derivatives in the fund, which is essentially, financial derivatives like options, futures, that type of stuff. So I am currently designing the derivatives case. So anyone who competes in that case is going to be, I designed that. And yeah, it's a pretty big event, and I'm looking forward to it.
No, good, exciting, good for you. All right, well, nice talking to you.
Yeah.
Keep in touch. All right.
For sure. Good talking to you.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.